Alright, let's be honest, America loves a good victory parade. We've got more confetti in storage than a party supply store after New Year's Eve. But today, we're diving into some of the most debated military conflicts in US history. These aren't your textbook mission accomplished moments. No, no, no. These are the wars and operations that didn't go as planned, often seen as losses or failures. Now I know what you're thinking, John. Why you gotta bring the mood down? Well, because sometimes folks, we need to look at the full picture, even if it's a bit messy. Our first stop takes us back to the late 18th century, the age of powdered wigs and apparently paying pirates for safe passage. You see, back then, the Barbary states of North Africa had a bit of a side hustle going on, capturing merchant ships and holding their crews hostage for ransom. And guess who got caught up in this maritime shakedown? You guessed it, the fledgling United States of America. Now, we like to think of our founding fathers as these stoic badasses who wouldn't flinch at attacks on tea, but when it came to pirates, they basically coughed up the cash. For years, the US paid tributes to these Barbary pirates just to keep our ships sailing the Mediterranean. It wasn't until later, under Presidents Jefferson and Adams, that we finally built up our navy and told those pirates, alright, enough is enough. Even then, it was a long and costly fight, and some argue that the treaties we eventually signed still involved, you guessed it, more payments. So, yeah, not exactly a shining moment of military dominance there. Vietnam. A conflict so sprawling and complex it's practically the war and peace of military blunders. Where do we even begin? The Vietnam War was supposed to be a quick win, a way to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Instead, it turned into a quagmire that sucked in American lives and resources for over a decade. From the jungles to the rice paddies, US troops found themselves fighting an elusive enemy, hampered by confusing objectives and a growing disillusionment back home. And let's not forget the Tet Offensive, a surprise attack by the North Vietnamese that, while militarily a failure for them, shattered the illusion of American progress and turned public opinion against the war. The fall of Saigon in 1975, with those iconic images of helicopters evacuating people from rooftops, marked a bitter end to a conflict that left deep scars on both sides. Nestled between World War II and Vietnam, the Korean War often gets overshadowed, earning it the unfortunate nickname, the Forgotten War. But trust me, this was no small skirmish. It was a brutal conflict that pitted the US and its allies against communist forces from North Korea and China. After 3 years of fighting, millions of casualties, and a whole lot of frozen terrain, the war ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, an armistice agreement that divided the Korean peninsula along the 38th parallel. Technically, the war never officially ended. It's like that couple that breaks up but never quite sorts out the custody agreement for their shared Netflix account. Things are tense, unresolved, and there's always a chance someone might start binge-watching Great British Bake Off out of spite. Chapter 4. Bay of Pigs, a Bay of Blunders more like. The Bay of Pigs invasion. You know, that moment when the CIA tried to stage a coup d'etat in Cuba, and it went about as smoothly as a toddler trying to make a souffle. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Train a bunch of Cuban exiles, land them on the island, spark a popular uprising, and overthrow Fidel Castro. What could possibly go wrong? Well, pretty much everything. The invasion force was poorly equipped, outnumbered, and outmatched. The promised air support never fully materialized. And the whole popular uprising thing? Yeah, that was a bust. The invasion was a complete and utter disaster, a major embarrassment for the Kennedy administration, and it pushed Cuba even closer to the Soviet Union. Chapter 5. Somalia. From famine relief to firefight. The situation in Somalia in the early 90s was a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. Famine ravaged the country, warlords ran rampant, and the world looked on in horror. The United States, along with other nations, stepped in with a noble goal to provide aid and restore some semblance of order. It started with good intentions, delivering food and supplies to desperate people. But as with many well-intentioned interventions, things took a turn. The mission expanded. The United States found itself embroiled in Somalia's complex clan warfare, and then came the Battle of Mogadishu. You might know it better as the inspiration for the book and movie Black Hawk Down. That's right. The one with the helicopters, the intense firefights, and the grim reminder that even the best-laid plans can go to hell in a handbasket faster than you can say humanitarian intervention. Chapter 6: Iraq, a regime change and a whole lot of chaos. Remember the good old days of 2003? Low-rise jeans were all the rage, Finding Nemo was blowing minds in theaters, and the United States decided to invade Iraq. The stated goal? To disarm Saddam Hussein of his alleged weapons of mass destruction, which, spoiler alert, never actually materialized. The invasion itself was swift, toppling Saddam's regime in a matter of weeks. But the aftermath, oh boy, the aftermath. Instead of a peaceful transition to democracy, Iraq descended into chaos. Sectarian violence exploded, a brutal insurgency took root, and the country became a breeding ground for extremism. The United States found itself stuck in a quagmire, spending billions of dollars and losing thousands of lives in a conflict with no clear exit strategy. Chapter 7: Afghanistan. The longest war, the most uncertain outcome. And finally, we arrive at Afghanistan, the country that became synonymous with forever war. After the 9/11 attacks, the United States invaded Afghanistan, aiming to dismantle al-Qaeda and topple the Taliban regime that harbored them. The initial invasion was successful, driving the Taliban from power. But then, as with so many conflicts we've discussed, the mission accomplished moment proved elusive. The United States and its allies spent the next 20 years trying to stabilize Afghanistan, build a functioning government, and train Afghan security forces, all while battling a resilient Taliban insurgency. The cost, both in terms of human life and financial resources, was staggering. And the final chapter of this story is perhaps the most disheartening of all. In 2021, the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, leading to the rapid collapse of the Afghan government and the Taliban's return to power. Outro: history's messy reality. So, there you have it, a glimpse into some of America's less than triumphant military endeavors. Look, no country has a perfect track record when it comes to war. These conflicts remind us that history is complex, and victories are not always clear-cut. What are your thoughts on these events? Let us know in the comments below.